Generation X action films next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, I'm ENC and you're watching Retro Serial. On today's program we have Thrash Pondo Pons and our special guest Owen from the Action Elite. Now I'm sure you've heard of this channel where he talks about action films of all genres and all eras. But on today's program, we wanted to have him on the program to talk about action films, particularly of growing up Generation X. And he doesn't disappoint. We just sit and chop it up about the action film and the action stars and some of our favorite films. And when we got done with it, we're like, there's so many we left out. And so I'm going to leave it up to you to leave it in the comments below about the action films that you wanted us to talk about. Maybe we'll make a part 2 to all this. Or you can join us on the Monday night live stream where we're going to have Owen back on, and you can chime in and talk to him and ask him all the questions that you wish we would have talked about in this interview. So with all that said, we're just going to jump straight into the interview. But before we do that, please do me the honor of liking, subscribing, hit the bell notification, share it on your favorite social media. Those things right there mean the world to us here at Retro Serial. If you want to go a step further, please, hit the link below to the Patreon page. You'll find 2 levels of support. There's the Cornflake Club, which is $3 a month. It's just a tip jar saying, hey, we like what you're doing. Please keep it up. Give us more Retro Serial, and we will continue to give you more Retro Serial. But if you want to be on the Insiders Club, you got to hit that $5 a month club, which is the Honeycomb Hideout, where you get most all videos and all podcasts 1 day in advance. And if you're listening to this on podcast form only, please write a review, leave a rating, and also share on your favorite social media. And just be aware that if you like what you're hearing, you're going to like what you're seeing over on the YouTube page. And by the way, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Owen's page and Thrash Pondo's page. Of course, I'm going to leave all their information in the comment section below. Now, with all that said, let's get to today's program. We're going to record. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. Again, like I say at the beginning of every show, I'm not going to belabor the introduction because I've already done an introduction. You've seen the introduction. You know what this is about. I have with me, as always, Thrash Pondo Pons on the channel. How you doing, Thrash Pondo?
Doing awesome, Ian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. And our special guest today is Owen from the Action Elite. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you agreed to be on the show. I met you a while back. We met on Samurai's channel where we were talking back and forth about different movies and stuff that he had us on for. And I thought, man, this guy has a way of being able to talk, and he's got some good ideas as far as action films is concerned. And so I said, you know what better defines Generation X than action films, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we grew up watching them. We grew up wanting to be them. We grew up, some of us even wanting to make action films. So, and you've got your channel, which is called the Action Elite, which is a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. Is that correct?
And it's mostly a website as well, theactionelite.com, and that's where it all started back in 2011.
Okay.
So I've been doing it for a long time. And I only started doing the YouTube channel last year after a few people had said, how come you've been doing the site for so long and you've never done a YouTube channel? So I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. So I did a few shows, I think, for about 6 months and then taking a bit of a break, but we're going to get back to it soon. So we'll hope to see you all soon on some more live streams when we'll be talking various van damage and such things.
Yeah, for sure. And what made you start this? What was the idea behind starting the web page, first of all?
Yeah, well, I remember at the time, it was just after the Expendables came out, and that's what motivated me. And for the longest time after, or just before I started the site, I had actually been to horror movies, and a lot of the time people assume that I only watch action movies, but I actually grew up mostly watching horror movies and action. And then I sort of moved away from action when the action stars sort of got older and they stopped sort of being as big as stars, and would head into straight to DVD land and things. So
Right.
I wasn't really sure where I was going then. And then once the Expendables came out, and I was like, man, I love those movies. And I was like, nobody talks about them anymore. And there were no other websites talking about action movies back then. Superhero movies in the MCU were becoming really big at that point. And I was like, I like the MCU and all that, but I like the old school hardcore violent action movies. Like my hero is Charles Bronson and of course Van Damme. So I just wanted to build that up and make people aware of the old school action to keep it alive.
So before, well, we're going to jump into this, but I mean, you already ticked, ticked some things in my brain to talk about. I just want your opinion. So who would win in a fight, Steven Seagal or Jean-Claude Van Damme?
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I think so too. And I'm sure you heard about the little dust up they had at Stallone's house.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s.
Yeah.
I think Steven Seagal is largely full of crap. So
I would agree. Yeah. And having met both of them.
You have?
Yeah, I met them both, and I much prefer Jean-Claude Van Damme as a person. Sorry, Stephen, it was cool and everything. Like he autographed my Laserdisc of Out for Justice, which I have there, and it says "To all my love, Steven Seagal," which I thought was awesome. But Van Damme was just so much easier to chat to, and he wasn't scary the way Steven Seagal was. Like Seagal didn't really speak; he was perfectly civil, but he just didn't really speak.
He's a little bit of an imposing character, from what I understand.
He at least didn't punch me in the stomach, which I thought was a plus. But Van Damme was awesome. He was just one of the coolest people I've met. It was sort of meeting your childhood hero, and sometimes it disappoints you, but actually Van Damme exceeded all my expectations, and I thought he was just this awesome guy, really good.
That's really cool. Did you see the Mad TV rendition of Steven Seagal?
Yes.
He's just breaking people's arms and stuff.
Just constantly, yeah.
Oh man, that was hilarious. Like this innocuous people too. Yeah. That's a lot of fun. So then after you started the web page, you'd been doing the web page for a while, and you said just last year you started the YouTube page.
Yeah, the YouTube channel had been there for a while. I mean, I started the YouTube channel a few years ago, but I never bothered really doing anything with it. I'm generally, up until last year, I was always very camera shy. I'm very much an introvert. So as soon as the camera comes on me, it's normally, but I've sort of gotten over that, and I actually do enjoy it now. It's quite surprising how much I enjoy it now. So that's why it took me so long, was just sheer, shyness and reticence. But then I just wanted to take the site in a different direction and try something new. So like I said, we'll continue doing more things, and I would like to do more interviews on YouTube, maybe do some live interviews and have fans able to interact with stars and things. So I know all kinds of interesting people who could be on it. So we'll see how things go.
That's cool. That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. I think the last one that I saw, might have been the last one you did, was your live stream on Dune. And I interacted with you there for a little bit on Dune, the new Dune. Was that the last one you did, or did you do?
Yeah, was I on that? I remember we talked about it. We've talked about it sort of a few times, but we sort of just repeat ourselves all the time, just talk about the same stuff. But I remember we were talking about that on one of the shows. Sometimes we just talk about just random things like what's going on in action at the time, and there's no specific things. So, but I remember talking about Dune, and we did a few things on that, and then J-Man did a show on it as well, reviewing it as well. So and do you mostly do you do all action of all eras, or do you mostly stick with GenX, or do you mostly stick with what's coming out these days, or what? I do all of it. I go back to the beginning, and I do now as well. I mean, a lot of people just want to focus on the 80s and 90s. We all know that was like the heyday of the genre, but there's still some good movies coming out now, like John Wick, and then we get some Scott Adkins movies as well. There is still plenty coming out. Not right now. I mean, this year's pretty quiet. There's nothing coming out this year, really. There's like 3 movies I think I'll see probably the rest of the year. Everything's been moved to next year, but yeah, I mostly focus on movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like I've just actually watched Convoy the other night with Chris Christopherson. Do you remember that?
I don't.
Oh yes, I remember it.
Yeah, so I just watched that, and I've written a review for it, and so I'm post that in the next few days. So I just like picking random obscure movies from then, and just reminding people that they exist.
Cool. You got any introductory questions, Thrash Pondo, or do you want to just jump into it?
Well, not so much a question, more of a basics request. Action tends to be a very, very, very broad term. And I was wondering how you break it down. Like you were mentioning Charles Bronson, one of my favorite action heroes.
Okay.
And take him, for example. He, of course, was in The Dirty Dozen, which would be more of a war film or an action film. Or take one of my favorite Westerns he was in, Once Upon a Time in the Old West. Western or action? I mean, how do you classify them into different subgenres, or do you see it as an overall theme?
I actually class it as subgenres, and sometimes I do get some abuse for this, and people are like, is that really an action movie? And I'm like, well, is there action in it? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, then it's an action movie. So, I mean, like Westerns, yes, they are a genre in itself, but I consider them action movies. If there's action in it, there's chases, there's shootouts, there's fight scenes, then that's an action movie. And there are different subgenres. And I mean, if I were only talking about the movies which starred Arnold and Stallone or whatever, then I would have nothing to talk about. I mean, I've already covered all of their movies, all of Van Damme's movies, most of Seagal's movies. So, you want to be interesting and always explore other things. And yeah, definitely, I like to explore subgenres. Like I said, Dirty Dozen, the Men on a Mission movies, like Where Eagles Dare, things like that too. I mean, those are great movies, and they sort of inspired what would come. Like I think Eastwood and Bronson really inspired the action heroes of the 80s. Like you got the renegade cop with Harry Callahan, and then the vigilante with Paul Kersey. So those two sort of major characters, which you wouldn't have John McClane or any of these other guys without it.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too before we got on the program. Like, what is an action movie? Like it seems to be very overlap significantly with other genres. So like Star Wars, I was thinking about that in a prime example. I mean, is it a sci-fi or is it an action? Well, it really is both. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's sci-fi, but it's also an action film. I mean, it's got action in it. I mean, we're watching it for the action.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, there's martial arts in it, like particularly like the prequels, which I think could probably have the best action scenes of the saga. Even though the movies are flawed, you got the great battle lightsaber fights with Darth Maul, and
yes,
I think they're phenomenal. And those are action scenes, and nobody's going to be like, oh, but they're not action movies. Yes, they are. They're action movies. There's fight scenes. There's things blowing up. There's chases, whatever else. That's action. So I like to keep it broad. I mean, sometimes in the past we've reviewed things and I'm like, that's really more of a horror movie. I mean, like I watched recently Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, and I was like, yeah, that's a horror movie with action elements in it. There is action in it, there's shootouts, and I mean, I can be quite broad in the definition of it. Sometimes maybe something just definitely isn't action, and I'd be like, no. I mean, I reviewed Joker on the site. Yeah. Why would I? That's not really an action movie. Why did I review that? But I just wanted to.
Yeah.
I did just review what I feel like. So even though I wouldn't consider that an action movie, because there's like not really many action scenes in it, if any.
Well, the 28 Days Later franchise, that is as much action as it is horror to me. And the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, I just classified that as a straight out action film with horror elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and I love both movies as well. And the second movie is very much more of an action movie. So like, I think the zombie genre, it's horror and action. And I think the two genres are very similar in terms of what people like. Like, I like watching violent action movies. I like watching violent horror movies. So I like watching, gratuitous nudity and things like that in movies. So that's what I like to see.
Right on. Right. Well, let's jump into kind of the beginning of the action movies genre. For me, it's a little bit difficult to pin down like, well, this is an action movie where there's more action than anything else, because I almost see it as synonymous with movies. I mean, as soon as you have the advent of the movie, you really have the advent of the action genre. What would you say about that? How would you pin down the advent of action movies?
I mean, action has been around really since the beginning of cinema. I mean, I think technically the first action movie was The Great Train Robbery, which is like a silent movie, but there's an action scene on it. It's like on top of a train, and there is action in it, and then it sort of evolved from that. And I think in terms of creating the sort of the renegade cop type character. Once again, you maybe see Bullet with Steve McQueen. I thought he was sort of a major character, and even then, the Western sort of developed into the action movie. You had characters like John Wayne, and even in his later years, he would move to action movies like Brannigan and things like that. So I think when people the public generally got bored of Westerns, then it just changed into the action genre, and kind of the same like that.
Yeah, I think so too. Thrash, you have anything to say about that? Like the beginning?
Just, I think action has always been with us. I mean, if you go back to the silent era with Broken Blossoms, which is more of a tearjerker, that end scene where the girl is locked in the room trying to survive the attack from her father, and her friend is running to her rescue, there's a certain amount of thrill there. I mean, it's intense. It's an action sequence. So I couldn't agree with Owen more that I think action in cinema has been around from the get-go. It's certainly evolved more over the decades as we've been more and more capable of creating more intense cinema with improved cameras and cinematography and camera tricks and, of course, computers. But I think it's something that has always been with us.
So let's move it into kind of the Gen X era. What would you feel like the biggest differences between the 70s action movies that were kind of coming out to the previous era of action, movies that kind of laid the genre? Would you say there's any type of themes that have emerged in the 70s in action films that were that turned a corner to some degree than the previous generation of action films, the previous decades of action films? And either one of you can chime in on this.
The amount of violence went through the ceiling between the 70s and the 80s, and like an action movie was almost like a comedy adventure in the 70s. In the 80s, they were the buckets of blood.
Let's do the 70s first. We'll wait on the 80s. Let's do this, the difference between the 70s and everything that came before. I want to hear the 80s stuff, but let's just postpone that for just a second. So what would you say the big deal was the 70s then? What was the big deal between the 70s and say the 50s and 60s?
Well, Owen, I think you said it yourself with one of the biggest action movies in the 70s was Convoy, or that type of thing, where the action was car chases or fist fights, but didn't have a gigantic body count, with a couple of notable exceptions. Peckinpah was doing some very intense, bloody movies. And of course, when you get to 78, 79, then you're starting to get into the Vietnam stuff with The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now. And that sort of opened the floodgates of very, very, very violent cinema, which we found in the 80s, if you would concur.
Yeah, I would. The 70s had that sort of nihilistic feel to a lot of the movies, and there was this sort of anti-establishment thing going on, where it's against the man, in things like Convoy and Smoking the Bandit or whatever, where it's done in a fun caper sort of way, but there is that sort of underlying thing about anti-establishment. So there was that, and then, like you said, it goes into the Vietnam War, and then once that happened, that really changed things, and then you got First Blood in the early 80s, and I think First Blood was probably the most important film at the beginning of the 80s for that, because that created the action hero, really, and then everything sort of copied that since.
Right on.
Yes.
Let me ask you a little bit about this, because for me, I think one of the biggest things about the 70s and action heroes, as I kind of look at the genre, is the development of kind of either the dirty cop or the vigilante seems to be developed. It almost seems like there were action films before that, but they almost seem to be kind of white hats versus black hats. And you can kind of tell, the good guy was the cop who did it right and by the book. And yeah, there was the car scenes and the chase scenes or the horse chase scenes or something like that. But it almost seems like in the 70s, particularly in the late 70s, or mid 70s, there was the rise of the kind of gritty, call to arms, not real, thrown into it. well, with Charles Bronson with Death Wish and things like that. Did Death Wish come out in the 70s? That's the 70s.
I think it was
Yeah.
74, I think it was.
Yeah.
Mid 70s, yeah, somewhere
Yeah.
in there.
And also uh, Dirty Harry, kind of a thing where he's kind of more of a mean cop, or he bends the rules at the edges. And really the big thing for me was the Death Wish thing, where it's an action movie, but he's not the knight in shining armor. He's the Dark Knight, basically, kind of a thing. So did you notice the rise in that as you look back on the 70s kind of era?
Yeah, sort of the anti-hero, which I thought was interesting, particularly Paul Kersey, who I like. It's not just an action movie for the sake of action. It actually is trying to say something. You are questioning, oh wait, is he really any better than the people he's killing? So you're questioning the whole moral thing of being a vigilante. And then there's the whole idea that he's not some invincible badass. I guess they would go on to be that sort of in the sequels, which I still love. I love all of the movies for various reasons. But the first one, he throws up after he kills the first person. You remember he comes home and runs into the bathroom, and he feels like a real person, and how you would react after doing such a thing. And I thought Bronson did that really well. Yeah,
for sure. Now, I do want to say, because you hit on something there, and then Thrash, you also hit on this too. So let's move it into the 80s. Because I think 80s, you start getting the rise of the action hero, the iconic action hero. And you, Owen, mentioned Stallone. So let's riff on that for a little bit. Say what you'd like to say about Stallone and First Blood.
Yeah, well, Stallone to me is probably one of the most important figures in action cinema, and he was just around just before Arnold. I think because Arnold had he was doing Conan and everything around about that time, and he was just sort of making a name for himself. But First Blood was once again an adaptation of the book, and was about the Vietnam vets and how they were treated. And it still had that sort of 70s nihilism to it, especially the original ending where Rambo gets killed. At the end, which is what happens in the book. But it still has that grit to it. And once again, like Paul Kersey in the sequels, in the first movie in Rambo, he's a normal guy, but he's using his skills, but he's certainly not invincible. And he breaks down crying at the end, which always gets me tearing up at the end. It's a really sort of upsetting scene to watch. So it's not just, once again, an action movie for the sake of action. It is actually saying something about the way the vets were treated, and lots of movies sort of copy that since. There's like Missing in Action and all these various movies since, like The Expendables, not the Stallone Expendables, but the one from Serio, I forgot his name. Italian filmmaker, and he just did all these knockoffs.
Yes.
Serio Santiago, is that his name?
I'm drawing a blank, but I know the film you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking
about,
yeah. And it's called The Expendables then, and he did all these sort of like cheap knockoffs. Like he's a Filipino director, like Filipino knockoffs of these movies. Serio Santiago, I think his name was, yeah. And there was, because of First Blood, but mostly Rambo First Blood Part 2 was really the one that sort of defined the genre, where everyone was copying that for years afterwards. So Stallone definitely laid the template down, and then Arnold did it with Commando and Terminator as well. Because I mean, Terminator, that's a sci-fi slasher action movie. I mean, it's all these genres put together. It's like everything put together. I mean, when I was watching it recently, I forgot just how good it actually was. I mean, Terminator 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time. And then whenever I watched the first one, I was like, this is still a really, really great movie. And it's nightmarish and once again kind of nihilistic, and just has that darkness to it.
Right.
So
yeah, well, I think that you do kind of get the rise of what becomes, especially in the 80s, the action hero with, like you said, Rambo. Because then he's the guy that's sent on the mission, and it is a turn from First Blood. I mean, First Blood, he's kind of thrown into it, where in this one he's sent on a mission, and he does seem a little over the top. You can't kill me kind of a thing that we get later in like Commando. Did Commando come out before First Blood 2, or did he come out?
No, just after. I think it was 85.
Five.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned too that they started to try to copy that.
Mm.
What was it about that you think that they tried to copy?
Well, mostly the one-man army. That was the genre in itself, was the one-man army genre where bullets bounce and dance around him and never actually hit him. Particularly in like First Blood Part 2, where
Yeah.
the guy's shooting at him and he fires his arrow at him in slow motion, even though the guy's like 3 yards away from him. It was a classic. I love Part 2.
Or in Commando, where he there's a flower bed in front of him, and somehow the flower bed is stopping the bullets as they hit. Like they're blowing up the flowers and not going into him.
Yeah.
Like, how convenient! There must be iron blossoms.
Yeah. So yeah, there's so many of these type of movies, and it was just really a template. It was like, okay, they're going behind enemy lines to rescue some POWs or something like that, and it's a guy who's got PTSD and whatever. It's generally the same kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, the movies sort of blend together. I've seen so many of them, I can never remember which is which. And I'm like, does that happen in this movie or that movie? Because I've just seen so many.
Oh, we got so many of them that we actually got the action parody. Where we have what was the one with Charlie Sheen? What was that movie?
Hot Shots.
Yeah, Hot Shots and Hot Shots Part 2. Yeah. Those are pretty funny, and they actually did parody that exact scene where where he's like, and then it's
firing a chicken.
Yeah, well, it shows this guy shooting at him, and it shows him drawing the.
And he's right next to him.
And then it pans out, and they're right next to each other. But then you actually had another kind of parody but a little bit more serious, but with Tango and Cash. That was I mean, it was almost like borderline comedy with action in it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was funny too. So now what kind of let's riff on this a little bit. Let's go into Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he also kind of him and, well, I don't know, like, who would you say ruled the 80s? Like, who are the people that ruled the 80s? Both of you, either one of you, go.
Action?
Yeah, action.
Well, of course, Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and of course, missing in action. I can't believe I can't think of his name. Thank you, Chuck Norris. Of course, Chuck Norris, who I remember first movie I saw him on was The Octagon, which I believe was 1980. And so he was kind of there throughout the 80s. That was sort of like his time, man. And I love The Octagon because it was one of the first movies that brought up the concept of the ninjas. So you had the American badass fighting ninjas. What more could you want? And I mean, there were some others. Rick, I don't remember if we were talking about action comedies. Eddie Murphy was his Beverly Hills Cop movies and
48
others.
48 hours. Yeah.
48
hours. Perfect.
Yeah.
With Walter Hill. Yeah. Walter Hill film. Yes. He was possibly the pinnacle of the comedic action hero. And there were plenty of them in the 80s as well.
Yeah. So who are some of your favorites of the 80s, Owen?
Oh, love them all, particularly Stallone. Love Chuck Norris as well. Also still love Bronson, because Bronson was still making movies. They may not have always been big, but he went to work with Cannon Films. Of course, Cannon Films became big in the 80s. So we got Michael Dudikoff and the American Ninja movies, and the late, great Steve James, who was taken from us far too soon. I loved him in the American Ninja movies. So yeah, love Dudikoff. And then in the late 80s, then it would be Van Damme and Seagal. I really started to enjoy their movies, but that was really towards the end of the 80s. Like Bloodsport was 88, I think it was. So yeah, I would say Stallone and Arnie were the major heroes of then, and then of course Bruce Willis.
Yeah, you got to mention Bruce Willis.
Yeah, he redefined it with Die Hard, where it went from the one-man army to a normal guy in an extraordinary situation. So that's when it changed when it became the 90s.
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting, because it's almost like a bookend as far as like what we were talking about with First Blood. First Blood was a man with extraordinary skills being kind of thrown into a situation that he didn't really want to be in. But then at the end of the 80s, you get Bruce Willis, who is a man without extraordinary skills, just a cop, but then thrown into a situation with a little bit of comedy added into it. Kurt Russell comes up in this too. I think he was
of course, Snake Plissken. Jack Burton, two icons.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I think, and then plus his the martial arts film that he did. I forgot the name of it off the top of my
Big
head.
Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, that's
right?
Jack Burton. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, is that the Jack Burton
Yeah,
character?
Jack Burton. Yeah.
Sorry.
There's so many great lines.
Yeah, that was one of the best. You know that originally it was going to be the Asian guy who was the star of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear about that or no?
Yeah, he kind of was anyway. Ernie Reyes Jr., where Jack Burton is kind of the idiot.
Yeah,
and he just sort of gets through out of luck. But it's Ernie Reyes Jr. who's actually the main guy. He's the real hero of the story.
Right. So what are some of your favorites, not Stallone, but Arnold Schwarzenegger movies? What were some of the action ones that you really enjoyed watching?
I think Commando was one of the most important movies. That's just like a ridiculous body count, and for obvious reasons, I'm obviously a fan. It's just ridiculously fun. Endless body count, like just nameless goons just being destroyed, and it's sort of the movie that really defined the 80s. Everything about it was over the top excess. Great bad guys like Bennett, and just endless one-liners. It was just such an absolute riot. Loved Commando. Love the Terminator as well, of course. And there's some lesser movies which were like Red Heat and Raw Deal, which I still enjoy as well. They're not bad. They're not quite as good, but I like them. And then when going into the 90s, we've got T2 and Total Recall, of course, and Predator. I see Predator is another one. Horror movie, action movie, sci-fi. It's like all the genres mixed together. So
right,
that's whenever people were like, "Oh, well, why did you review this?" And I was like, "Well, if I reviewed that, then I can review this." So
yeah. Predator was awesome. I loved Predator.
Yes.
I didn't get to see Predator Part 2. Unfortunately, it's one of them I need to. It has slipped through the cracks at the time, but I need to go back and watch it.
Interestingly enough, Predator 2 is my favorite scene of the franchise, though. Which is the subway scene. I love the scene where they're on the train and the Predator's just attacking everybody with a gun on the train. And I just love that whole idea that they only attacks people who are armed, and it's in LA where everyone has guns. So he's just attacking. So I just love that concept.
He's just killing everybody. Right. Yeah. Right. All right. So let's take us into the 90s. I think, one of the things at the end of the 80s too was, I don't really view, let me just put it to you this way. I don't really view Arnold Schwarzenegger or Stallone or as kind of martial artists. They do martial arts in their movies, but it's kind of limited and stuff like that. But I do
brute strength.
Yeah. I do see kind of a turn in the 90s with action stars, like also kind of incorporating their martial arts. And it's probably not maybe a lot of films, but they're films that certainly stick out in my mind. Of course, one of them is the martial arts film of Van Damme that we saw in, what was it? It was at 1988 when it came out.
Bloodsport, yeah.
Bloodsport, yeah. That was a fantastic show, man. I love that show. We traveled an hour to see that show, to see that movie. Yeah, we did. We were living, it was actually in this town, but I was living an hour away from where we were. And we traveled an hour just to see that show. Everybody's like, this is the best show. You got to see it. So I went down and I wasn't disappointed. And I have to totally agree with you. I think Van Damme would beat the crap out of Steven Seagal. No problem. I view Steven Seagal as largely a phony. So I think,
he was in like 5 decent movies, and that was in the 90s, and then hasn't really done anything.
Yeah, everything else has been total. Now those 5 movies have been really good movies. Those first 5 movies. And I don't think we can talk about action movies of the 90s without mentioning Steven Seagal. So those,
we could. We don't need to, but we could.
We would be remiss. We would be remiss if we did. And I think actually where I met you for the first time is we were talking about what was better.
Out for Justice and Under Siege, was it?
Yeah. I think that's what we were on Samurai Show talking about, that Out for Justice or Under Siege. Where did you land on that, by the way? I forgot.
The correct answer is Out for Justice.
Really? I own Out for Justice, and I think I'd still give it to Under Siege. Really? But I do like Out for Justice. So
I love William Forsythe in Out for Justice. I think he's terrifying, and he's just crazy. And there's like this, like almost, I always get laughed at when I say this, but it's almost like a Scorsese kind of vibe to The Neighborhood, and just the violence in it is like really shocking. Like whenever he goes up to that woman and just shoots her in the head in the car, And it's like this really shocking scene. There's nothing about Out for Justice that annoys me, but in Under Siege, Erika Leniak's character is kind of whiny and annoying. So, although the birthday cake scene is obviously the best scene in the film.
Yeah, you got me there. So yeah, all right, I'll buy that. But you know what? There's no wrong answer.
No,
but I can certainly see your point.
I have to agree with Out for Justice being better too, and I think I said that one of the reasons why is, I think a film, when you're looking at a film, it's only as good as its bad guy. I mean, really, it raises to the level of the bad guy, and in Out for Justice, boy, that bad guy was a psycho. He was somebody you'd really be afraid of.
Yeah, he felt real.
Yeah, and the Tommy Jones character was a little comical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he wasn't scary. Yeah,
and also the Gary Busey guy was a little. It didn't. Yeah, it was for me. That's kind of what I mean. I still loved Under Siege and Under Siege 2. I thought they were both really good films. But I just, there was a little bit kind of, you can't take the bad guy too seriously. He's a little jokey. So that's why I would give it to and not to mention the fact that there's just fantastic martial arts in that show, Out for Justice.
The pool hall fight. Anybody seen Richie? It's like one of the best action movie scenes ever, where he just kicks the ass of everybody in the bar, and it's such swagger in it, and he has swagger which no other action star ever really had, where Arnold would have like a bazooka or whatever else, but he'll just walk into a bar and he'll bitch slap anybody who is in his way, and that's it,
right?
So that was one thing I would give to Seagal, which is probably
sorry about my dogs there, sorry they're barking.
That's what they do.
Yeah,
no worries.
That's what they do. Yeah, and then Danny Inosanto is in Out for Justice too, so I got to give it there because I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. So I actually teach Bruce Lee's style of martial arts.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, Jeet Kune Do. Yeah, I've been doing JKD since '96, somewhere around there. Somewhere around there is when I first got interested in JKD. Yeah. So it was when the movie Dragon came out. So
yeah. I love that movie. I don't care what anyone says. I love that movie.
I love it too.
That's the movie that got me into Bruce Lee. I mean,
same, actually,
I knew about him before that because I was in karate and kung fu and stuff before that, but I was never really a big fan. I was more of a fan of Chuck Norris back then, and then that movie came out, and I didn't know, back in what did it came out? It came out in '96, right?
Wasn't that late? I thought it was more like 94, but it could have been as late as 96.
No, maybe you're right. Maybe it was 94.
The year 94 just jumped into my head for some
93,
reason.
94. But
I think it was 94, maybe.
Yeah, it probably was. No, actually, it might have been even 93.
Okay.
Because I was in Israel in '94, and I know that for sure.
I have to Google this. It's going to drive me nuts. Hold on.
I was going to do it myself, but I didn't want to get pulled away, so I will defer to you.
I must know. 1993.
Oh, what? 93.
So there we are.
I think I saw it in 94. That's what we think of 94.
Right.
Yeah.
But I didn't know at the time, that the movie was basically, highly full of crap. I had no idea, I mean,
I just like it as a movie.
Yeah, as a movie, it was great. And I wish we would have seen more from Jason Scott Lee.
I know. I watched a movie with him the other day called Boone with Neil McDonough and Jason Scott Lee's in the opening scene of it, and then that's all he's in it. I was like, what? This guy should be like one of the main guys in this movie. It so frustrates me that he never became a huge star because he had such charisma. I loved him in Dragon the Bruce Lee story, and then I loved him in Soldier as well with Kurt Russell.
I was going to say he was in Soldier too.
Soldier, right.
That was good times, yeah.
And I think, do you ever listen to the Kung Fu Genius? Have you ever listened to that podcast? I don't know if you're into martial arts at all. So
sometimes, yeah, but I actually don't mostly have time to listen to the podcasts, to be honest.
Right.
So I try sometimes, but generally I don't listen to my own.
Yeah. Well, he made a comment that he thought that that even though he didn't like the movie because of all the embellishments, he did make a salient comment about it. He said that he thought that he did the best job at portraying Bruce Lee without trying to imitate him. It was like,
good point.
It was more of a capture the essence of Bruce Lee and not be so over the top comical or try to just straight up imitate him, that he really captured the essence of the personality of Bruce.
Yeah, because he wants to act rather than imitate, which
Yeah.
is the thing. He's not. Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, so let's get down to the films of the 90s as far as action films are concerned. Thrash Pondo, what are some of your favorite action films of the 90s?
Well, I think we've talked about them. I think Soldier. What year was Soldier? 98?
97 or 98, I think it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one. I know that's more of a sci-fi, but as we talked about, it's some length.
It's action. Oh, yeah.
It's action. I was really getting into the Hong Kong cinema at this time too. By the way,
I mentioned that. Yeah, Hard Boiled and The Killer, things like that. We meant to mention that.
Yeah. Bullet in the Head, I think, is my favorite Hong Kong film of all time.
It's rough. It was good though. Yeah.
It really was rough. That's probably why I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was starting to go through one of my incarnations of my foreign movie phase, and so I was doing a lot of Hong Kong cinema, and of course, Clint Eastwood as the aging action hero coming back for another round. That movie he did where he was the aging Secret Service member.
Oh, In the Line of Fire.
Thank you.
That's my first Clint Eastwood film in the cinema, and that's what made me a fan. Absolutely loved it.
Just outstanding movie. Yeah. Outstanding movie.
So good. Introduced us to John Malkovich as well. Really sort of made him a star. I remember seeing him and thinking, that guy's terrifying. I want to see him in everything.
Well, I remembered him from Empire of the Sun.
Yeah.
He was Basie. So I'm like, oh, it's the Basie character who I absolutely despised in Empire of the Sun. So, it's just John Malkovich is one of those characters where he steals the movie no matter what he does. Mm-hmm. He really is an amazing actor.
Yeah. There are so many countless movies I love from the 90s. Terminator 2 is probably number one. Total Recall, Speed, Die Hard with a Vengeance, Hard Target. I love Hard Target. Maybe my favorite Van Damme movie, or certainly way up there. I also love Sudden Death. Nobody else does, or I get loads of abuse. So why do you have a poster for Sudden Death there? And I was like, because it's awesome, and Powers Booth is great.
Wait, which one was Sudden Death? Remind me. I've seen almost all of this. Yeah, I see
the one where terrorists take over the ice hockey stadium. Basically a Die Hard ripoff.
Oh yeah. And
Powers Booth is just an absolute turd in this movie. He's so evil. He just shoots everybody, and you just hate him. I just love hating a villain like that. So it was mostly him that I liked about it, and the music score. The music was really cool. Die Hard with a Vengeance as well. Die Hard 2 as well. That was 1990, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think so.
Sounds right. That sounds right. Yes.
Yeah. And that's where the franchise ended for me. It was the third movie. I was I'm not really interested in anything after that. Bald Bruce Willis stopped being John McClane for me.
What did he start being?
Bored Bruce Willis.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. All right.
Although, to be honest, it's no longer a secret anymore, though, because I've known for a while, but it's now that Bruce Willis actually now has dementia.
Is that official? I heard that months ago, and I haven't been saying anything.
Same here, yeah. I've heard it from several places, and I heard it from a director who'd commented on a post on YouTube and said, yeah, I'd worked for them, and that's why I think he was on stage and he forgot his lines or something, and it's horrible. So, I try to be kinder to whenever I'm watching his movies or doing reviews for whatever, and trying to understand that, he's not the same guy anymore, but that's why he sort of seems detached whenever you watch recent movies, particularly over the past couple of years. So it's very sad.
Yeah, well, I know that, and I don't know when he was diagnosed with it or whatever. I mean, it may have been recent, but I do know that he kind of doesn't try. There came a point where he got so big that he stopped trying on movies. Yeah. He just wanted to do as least as possible, read the lines and go, and just really do the least amount of work as possible. But again, I don't know how much the dementia really figured into that in the 90s. So I know that I actually really enjoy the one with Justin Long in it too. But yeah, but I get it. I understand. Die Hard with a Vengeance is good. Die Hard 2 I thought was good. Die Hard 1, I mean, we wouldn't have any of these without Die Hard 1.
There'd be nothing without it, yeah.
Yeah, but there were still, it was one of my least favorite out of those three, to be honest with you. I just I didn't care. There's I don't know even know where to start with it. It's a great movie. I do like it. I do enjoy it, but there's too much inconsistencies in it for me to. It's kind of weird because we all have the line of like, where do we draw our inconsistencies and still enjoy a show? It's just one of those things, and for me, it just crosses too many of those lines for me. Like with his bloody feet and stuff. I mean, it would have just been able to find him. I mean, it's just like they just would have been able to follow the blood and find him. It just would have happened. And the other thing is the black cop guy, his character arc just was flat to me. It was supposed to be this big deal that he shot this guy, and I couldn't have cared less. I'm like, to me anyway, to me. But I thought, yeah, I mean, it's a good show. I'd still watch it, but I thought 2 and then 3 was hilarious. I loved 3. That was a good one.
3 is maybe my favorite one, to be honest. I'm gonna be honest. I think it has the best script of the 3 of them. I think just the abuse they throw at each other. Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis in it. I think they're just both on fire. I love the dialogue in it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is whenever it started to get, well, I mean, the second one got ridiculous. I mean, they're all ridiculous in their own way, but this one just totally went for it. It was like, yeah, we know this is now a cartoon, but who cares? I mean, when they jump off the boat, when it explodes and they fall off the bridge and the cable and it cuts the guy in half and everything, and yet they're not dead. I mean, they're both dead, but they should be. But it's action movie logic, and that's why I don't overthink these things, because it's action movie logic. So I mean, in Commando, he would be dead within minutes. But
Speaking of Samuel L. Jackson, one action director from the 90s I completely haven't mentioned up until this point is, of course, Quentin Tarantino. You have to talk Quentin Tarantino when you talk 90s action. That's when I discovered him. That's when he really got his career going, and he had some really excellent stuff came out in the 90s. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, plenty of others, but those are probably my 2 favorites of his.
Yeah, but see, he also wrote True Romance, and True Romance, that's an action movie. That's another movie where it's like defies genres, but there's lots of action in it, there's lots of shootouts. I definitely consider that an action movie. And then he also wrote, of course, Natural Born Killers, and he did some script tweaks to Crimson Tide as well, which is another one of my favorites. So the 90s actually was a great era for action movies. There were so many. I can
really were.
Not even name them all. There were so many.
Right. Do you think there's anything about the action star that was set apart in the 90s as opposed to the 80s?
They got rid more of the muscle men sort of. There's martial arts was a big thing. Canon movies sort of died, or was it late 80s, early 90s, I think, and then PM Entertainment came along. Now, there's no such thing as a bad PM Entertainment movie as far as I'm concerned. They were mostly straight to VHS, but the action scenes were awesome. I mean, I watch them now, I'm like, this is better than anything that's out this year. I mean, I've watched so many of these movies, and like the stunt work is incredible and just great explosions. I mean, if I see lots of explosions in a movie, I'm happy. I'm like, that's a great explosion. It's not CG explosions, because like my pet hate is CG explosions and CG blood. But I like seeing the real thing, because that's the whole point of the genre. Is spectacle and stunts. So
that's a question that I kind of wanted to ask too, is how do you feel that special effects has helped or hindered the action genre? Do you feel it's helped in any way, or do you feel it's only hindered, or how do you feel the development of special effects?
I think it's helped the superhero genre. Like, without special effects, there wouldn't be the superhero genre, and that's really what the action movie is now, kind of, apart from the odd movie like John Wick or whatever, because I always like the more R-rated stuff. Generally, I think it's hindered it. As soon as if I see a CG explosion, I'm normally taken out of it, and I lose interest. Like, that's why I prefer the 70s, 80s, and 90s, because the action was all real and practical. The whole point is, oh, that's an amazing stunt. Digital stuntmen I have no time for whatsoever, and I'm like, that defeats the purpose of an action scene. This is a video game I'm watching now, not an action scene. So I generally hate CGI. It's like, I know Tarantino does. I remember he said it was the death knell of cinema.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, until it gets better and better. I mean, I do have to think that I think Lord of the Rings came out in 2003. And I thought that was that the some of it, like with the Balrog and all this stuff. But I thought that was kind of almost necessary.
Oh yeah.
For it to
You could have built a real Balrog.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it certainly has its place. I mean, Jurassic Park was a great film because of its special effects.
Yes.
But take my favorite action film of all time, The Warriors. And there is almost no special effects in it whatsoever. There's a few, exactly, and there's a few stuntmen doing some pretty cool stunts. Although you can see Fox's foot bounce when he hits the mat, when he supposedly falls in front of the subway. So that effect wasn't really pulled off. But it's really just people fighting and chasing and running and actually having action. You don't need computers to tell you what the action would be if it had actually happened.
Yeah, there's weights to it. Yeah. There's weights and there's stakes, where that person actually could have got injured doing that or whatever. But I mean, I just switch off because I mean that's generally why I'm not a huge MCU guy, because most of the finales just turn into CG with lasers flying into the air or whatever, and then I'm just like, okay, I'm bored now. And I prefer it whenever it's real people. That's why I think my favorite Marvel movie is probably Winter Soldier, because I think it has the best action scenes of the MCU, because there's lots of practical effects, there's stunts, and there's great fight scenes in it as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, that was the biggest thing that ruined Star Wars Episode 1 was the over the top. Now, they did say that if it wasn't for CGI, they really couldn't do it, because they really had to follow, some of what Yoda did. And that was really hard to make him, animate him as a puppet. But the way they did it, it was just, I mean, it almost looked like it was a cartoon. And you look back on it now, and I don't.
Part 2, Episode 2, particularly has aged the worst of the 3 movies. I think when you watch it, I've watched them all recently because I'm getting all excited for Kenobi in a few weeks. And when I watched the second one, I was like, oh god, the CG in it is really bad.
During the arena fight scene, that's tragic
in general. Yeah, I mean, you just see it just never looks real. And that's why the original trilogy is still the best, because you go back and it's filmed in real places and real sets. And that's why it looks better and doesn't date. I guess they've tweaked some of the effects and everything, but generally that's why practical effects.
Yeah, those new tweaks are horrible in my opinion.
Them. Yes, they're horrible.
The dancing scene in Return of the Jedi and all the extra things going on Tatooine in A New Hope is just awful.
The only thing I liked that they added in Empire Strikes Back, and it's the only thing which I liked about the special editions, was adding Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine, talking to Darth Vader, and I thought that works better, because you're sort of like, who's this other guy? Right. But I think that works better. I can't believe I'm saying this because I love him as an actor, but I hate Tamara Morrison's voice as Boba Fett. I preferred the original actor as Boba Fett. When I'm watching it, I'm like, no, I'm sorry, the guy had a raspier, tougher sounding voice. Whenever I'm watching this now, it just sounds like Tamara Morrison. Right.
Yeah, in Episode 1, I didn't actually hate the movie. I didn't hate the story. Let's just put it that way. I thought the story was okay. I just the comical.
It's Jar Jar. Let's face it, it's Jar Jar.
Jar Jar.
Yeah, I feel so bad because he was actually suicidal after the movie because he got so much bad press.
Yeah,
so
don't blame the poor guy. He's just reading the script and doing what he's told. Blame George Lucas. He directed it.
Right. It really was that particular character, and the way they made him. I mean, it was just so over the top ridiculous, and they were just trying to franchise into new kids, so the kids would be interested in it again. But you look at other action films. I know why they do it. The CGI is because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper now,
than blowing stuff up. I think that maybe in the future it will look better. You know what I mean? As time goes on, it will be less distinguishable. That's the really big problem. I mean, the problem with the CGI is you can tell it's CGI.
And that's the thing. Yeah. And the weird thing is, is that for the past few years, some of it's gotten worse. Like I went back, I can't remember what it was. I watched something recently, and there was earlier CG, and it looked better than some of the CG I've seen recently. And I was like, why is some of that better than now? But I watched a video about it, and I typed it on YouTube, and someone did a video saying, "Is it just me or CGI getting worse?" And they sort of explained it, and they said the problem was that studios are rushing films so much that the special effects department aren't getting enough time to work on them, because they're like, okay, this is the deadline, this is when the movie's out, so you have to have it ready by then, and it's such really quick. So that's why everything sort of feels rushed a lot of the time.
Yeah, they're just thinking of those dollars, man.
That's all they care about. Yeah, and bean counters are in charge now.
Yeah, they're not thinking of producing a legitimate piece of art right now. They're just thinking of like you said, the bean counters. Now, one movie I do have to say before we leave the 90s and then kind of go the last step that I want to take in this conversation is Gross Point Blank, man. That is a phenomenal film.
No meetings.
Huh?
No meetings.
Yeah, no. Right. Popcorn.
Oh my God. No, wait. We haven't talked about the other movies. Con Air, The Rock, Face Off. Oh my God. Nicolas Cage's Sacred Trilogy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Those are great movies. Well, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours.
Oh yeah.
There's so many. You ever hear about that joke about why Nicolas Cage should go on the Atkins diet?
No.
So he could turn down a role.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, there's so many action heroes, but Gross Point Blank was one of my favorite shows. Yeah. And I really love John Cusack. He's one of my all-time favorite actors, and just a general badass martial artist too. I mean, trained.
I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah. Did you see War Incorporated?
Yes.
Yeah, that was an interesting show. Did you like it?
It was okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember it was sort of dumped on at the time, but I have it on DVD somewhere. Buried in the vaults somewhere around here.
So, Desert Island, you could choose 5 action movies from any era up until 1999. You can't, let's go 2000. Up until 2000, anything before that. Desert Island, you have to pick 5 action movies. What would they be? Either one of you.
Choosing which child I love the most, that's really hard. Rash, if you want to go first, I need to think on this.
Okay, I'll go first. It might take me a second to get to the last 2, but I'll start off with The Warriors.
Okay.
I would have to go with, I'm on the fence, but I would only take one Western because I'd try to go for each of the subgenres. So I would go with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I would go, and we're sticking to just actions, so I'd probably take my favorite Charles Bronson film, Hard Times.
Correct, yes.
I'd have to take at least one war film, and that would probably be Charlton Heston's Midway, the extended cut.
Oh, I have that.
With that Battle of the Coral Sea, which they always omit every time they show it on network television. And then one last action film, I'd probably have to go with something with Tarantino. You know what? I was going to say Pulp Fiction, but I think I'm going to go True Romance because you reminded me of it when you said it. So that would be my 5th because I just love that. I think everyone in that movie is at their best. I think Christian Slater was possibly his best performance of his career.
Yeah.
Patricia Arquette was great. The scene with Dennis Hopper,
Christopher Walken,
exactly going because Christopher Walken is like I think one of the best scenes in Tarantino canon. So I would go with that, and that would make my number 5.
Okay, I still can't decide.
You can't decide. That's okay. If you can't decide,
I'm going to go for. I'll go for like pure action movies then. So I'm going to go in no particular order.
Okay.
I will say Rambo First Blood Part 2. I'll love it. It's might be nonsense. That's why I love it. I love Terminator 2, Total Recall, The Rock, and I got to have some fan damage. Hard Target. There we go.
A hard target. Right on,
Yeah.
right on.
So, although it's funny, Thrash, I think your favorite director is probably my favorite director, Walter Hill. I have three favorite directors: Walter Hill, Michael Mann, and John Carpenter. They're like my three favorite directors.
Oh wow, those are really good directors.
Excellent
Mm.
directors. And yes, I love Walter Hill for action films, but yes, those are great directors.
Yeah, he's just
Yeah,
great.
this would be hard for me to decide too. I think I'd have to go with I think Commando. I really like Commando. I
Mm.
just like the way I just like the whole film. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really good. First Blood, part one. First Blood for me got, it perked my interest in a lot of things, especially
Mm.
like survival stuff too. You know what I mean? Like wanting to be a green, being dropped off in the middle of nowhere and being able to survive and pull it off and use your resources and stuff like that, and all the booby traps he sets and things like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really clever. So First Blood, Terminator 2 for sure, Gross Point Blank for sure. And I don't know, maybe Die Hard with a Vengeance, something like that. That'd be like my five. Or actually, if I could choose like 5 action films and then 5 sci-fi films, because I probably, I mean, I'd have to take Empire Strikes Back wherever I go.
Yes.
And did you hear just a little quick thing about Empire Strikes Back? I just found this out. In the original Empire Strikes Back, they had to add an extra scene to it before it went out. They had did you hear about this or no?
No.
Not sure. What's
In the original Empire Strikes Back, the one released in 1980, George Lucas released it first of all to 8 theaters. And in those 8 theaters, before it went out mass, they realized at the very end of it that it was ambiguous as to where Luke and Leia were. Like, were they still on the Falcon? Were they in, it was ambiguous as to where they were, as to where people were. And they had to rush and create an extra scene. And it actually changed the whole thing, changed the music and everything. I just watched a video on it. I can't believe, but yeah, look it up. They actually had to change it. Yeah, it was very interesting. So this isn't, his CGI craziness being put in. This was actually, oh my gosh, it's unclear as to what's going on here at the very end. And we have to add a scene so that everybody knows that they're not on the Falcon and the Falcon's leaving and going away. And they had to extend some other stuff as far as the music is concerned too. What do you like? So let's end it with this. What do you hope to see as far as the future of action films are concerned? Is there any concerns you have? Is there any trends that you want to see, or is there trends you want to stay away from that you're hoping that they won't indulge in too much? What is your hopes and concerns for the action genre of the future?
I would like to get, well, they have moved away from it, but although I enjoy elements of the Bourne franchise had a terrible impact on the action genre, where it was all shaky cam action scenes, and that was really bad. The 2000s didn't have that many great action movies. I thought actually some of the best. I actually really liked The Transporter with Jason Statham, because that was sort of an old school action hero character, with martial arts, and you could see everything that was going on. And it's funny when you go back and you watch the old movies. I mean, some people are like, oh, the old action movies are quaint or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but I can see everything that's going on in it. Like if you're watching a fight scene, like you go back and you watch a Cynthia Rothrock movie, or Don Wilson, or Jeff Wincott, any of these movies, the camera moves back and will stay still, and you'll see the people fighting, and you actually just let them show off their skills. Whereas these days, like say Taken 3, you get 9 cuts as he's jumping over a fence, and it's ridiculously like over edited action scenes. And I just want more coherence in action, which I think we have. Once again, I know I talk about John Wick, but I think that really saves the genre, because there wasn't really much going on with it, and it brought a style, and like a visual style, which we'd never really seen, because I think John Wick movies are the best looking action movies probably I've ever seen. I think they look stunning, and that's sort of what everyone's trying to copy now. It's like, oh, this is Jane Wick or whatever. Everything is sort of being influenced by that now. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future. I'm not sure. I would like to see more practical effects. I would like to see more younger martial arts stars getting more of a chance. I mean, there aren't too many big up and coming action stars that I can think of. Scott Adkins deserves a bigger break. I'd like to see him in bigger movies. Thankfully, he's in John Wick 4. But yeah, aside from that, I just want to see more. I'd like to see more larger than life characters. I find that so many movies now are grim and depressing. Like, spoiler alert, but like, I hated No Time to Die. That's like my worst ever James Bond film. Spoiler alert, it was like, you killed James Bond. It was like, he lost. It was like, James Bond failed. I was like, I didn't want to see him fail. I watched James Bond to watch him win. I don't want to feel depressed at the end of the film. And I was depressed. It's the only Bond film I've watched once, and will probably never watch it again.
Right on. What about you, Thrash?
Well, and it's something I've said about other films, but I think it's worst in the action genre. In an attempt, and this has been going on for years, more and more, in an attempt to squeeze in more action, they tend to trim down things like story and character development. And those things, I think, are very, very, very important. We didn't love Jaws because there were a lot of scenes of a shark biting people. We loved Jaws because we cared about that triumvirate of characters and the story and all that. So you have to balance the two. And I'd like to see cinema getting back to balancing good filmmaking with good action making.
Yeah.
And the suspense too. We need some really good suspense, in these things where you're really on the edge of your seat, waiting for it to happen. I couldn't agree with you more as far as the character development is concerned. I mean, you want to see action films, to see action, but the action is better when you care about the people. You can just watch fight scenes on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Like, seriously, you can just pull up, choreographed fight scenes or choreographed car chases, and they're fun to watch. I've done that before, but it's not a movie. You've got to care about the characters. And what you brought up, Owen, about the shaky camera, that drove me nuts. I could not believe that, especially in the third one. The third Jason Bourne one.
It was unwatchable. Yeah. And then Jason Bourne afterwards, I was like, I actually felt sick watching it.
Yeah, it's just difficult to watch. All right, well, Owen, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what your plans are for your channel and where we can find you on the interwebs.
Well, if you can find me on theactionelite.com for all your action needs. And then actually I have another website as well called themovieelite.com because I like to watch other movies sometimes. So
okay.
That's like horror and sci-fi and drama and whatever else. So I don't update that as often as I should or could. I have a few people on that site, but the Action Elite is definitely the main one. That's my baby. So yeah, theactionelite.com, and then you can find us at Action Elite on YouTube as well. There hasn't been anything for a while, like I said, but I'm going to start doing it again soon, do some more live streams and maybe some interviews and things. So maybe next week, actually. Let's see how we get on.
Cool. Thrash, what are you working on these days? I just saw your new intro to your show.
Thank you. Yes, I finally added a trailer to my channel for people who aren't quite sure what they're getting when they come to my channel. And what you will be getting is some of the best of vintage sci-fi horror and some of the worst dad jokes ever conceived of in this or any other universe, and some other pop culture things that I think are a lot of fun. And you can find me, of course, at Thrash Pondo. Second word, Pons, Pons. Mr. Ian always adds a link in his descriptions to my channel. Please go to it. I just had my 100th subscriber, and I'm going for 1,000 more. And I'm going to get them all one at a time. And so please come to my channel. Tell me what you think. And I have an ongoing offer. New subscribers, make a suggestion to a new post, and I will make it for you in your honor.
Cool. Well, right on.
Ask, you shall receive.
Well, thank you both for being with us today, for being with me today. Thrash Pondo, always, I love having you. And Owen, thank you for gracing us with your presence. You are a wealth of information as far as action is concerned. And hopefully we're going to get you on the live stream in maybe if not this Monday, then the next Monday, and then you can interact with our audience. And by the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast format, please don't forget to subscribe to these guys' channels. And And know that we do have a YouTube channel. If you like what you're listening to or watching, you're going to love the YouTube channel. So go over there. If you liked what you heard here, we're going to be doing a live Monday stream where we talk about this, and you can chime in as far as your favorite action films are concerned. If you want to also help us out, share it on your favorite social media. That helps us out. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, share. If you want to go that extra step further, please visit the Patreon page where you'll find 2 levels of support. You'll find the Cornflake Club, which is $3 a month. It's like, hey, keep it up. We like what you're doing over there at Retro Serial. We want more Retro Serial. But if you want to be on the Insiders Club, you got to join that $5 a month Honeycomb Hideout, where you will receive most all videos and podcasts one day in advance, at least enough in advance so you could say, I saw it before everybody else saw it. All right, everyone. With that said, please stay retro, everyone.